So one of the things that came out, because we are going to go through the CVR, was that broken altimeter, ignored warnings, hearings revealed that what went wrong, DC crash that killed 67. And the key takeaway of this was that the helicopter's altimeter gauge was broken, and controllers warned the FAA years earlier about the dangers that helicopters presented. Jennifer Homendy scolded the FAA for not addressing safety concerns. Are you kidding me? 67 people are dead. How do you explain that? Our bureaucratic process, fix it, do better. But the altimeter was wrong, and this is kind of something I wanted Casmo to ask him, because they were flying at 278 feet, which is 78 feet above the 200-foot ceiling on that route. But investigators said pilots might not have realized that because the barometric altimeter they were relying on was reading 80 to 100 feet lower than the registered altitude by the flight data recorder. They found similar discrepancies in altimeters of 3 other helicopters from the same unit. Chief Warrant Officer Kylene Lewis told the board that an 80 to 100-foot discrepancy between different altimeters on a helicopter would not be alarming, because at lower altitudes, she'd be relying more on the radar altimeter than the barometric altimeter. Plus, Army strives to stay within 100 feet of target altitude on flight, so they could still do, even with it being off. But Rick Dressler, a medevac at Metro, told the NTSB that imprecision would not fly with his helicopters when a helicopter route like the one the Black Hawk was flying that night includes an altitude limit. Dressler said his pilots consider that a hard ceiling. And he also said, which I don't think is in here, that he actually was scared when the Army pilots were out there because he believed that they were not necessarily safe. I don't remember what article that was in, but that was also talked about. But the FAA was also warned about the helicopter traffic, troubling history of 85 near misses around Ronald Reagan. So first, let's address that part. Casmo, do you think that's a valid concern?
I mean, for that tight of airspace, I mean, that level of discrepancy is pretty big. I mean, I guess I get the one point with the comment, like at that altitude, I'm using the radar altimeter, but I think the field elevation there is like 8 feet or something. Like it's not much higher than the surface, but still there's a discrepancy. I'm surprised to hear that. I didn't know about that, about the altimeter variations or whatever, and that it happened in so many aircraft. But if you're going to have aircraft flying that close together, and if anyone's ever spent time in DC, you just see those helicopters flying up and down the river. Like the first time I saw that, I was like, this can't be real. Like this is ridiculous. And then for them to be flying that close to an airport with jets coming in. So yeah, I mean, I think under normal circumstances, maybe that's not a big deal, but there it's obviously a very big deal.
Yeah, and I think Austin had talked about they don't use a radar altimeter because of the basin, what they're actually flying over, all that water and stuff, and different like varying heights and stuff. You couldn't, like 200 feet wouldn't be realistic.
Yeah, well, you're going to get variations with a radar altimeter, and at the end of the day, ATC doesn't care what your radar altimeter is telling you. They're giving you an MSL, so that's what you have to work off. So it really doesn't matter what the RA says. And what if you have an RA go crazy? So yeah, and he also brought up that, and I guess one of your Army pubs, that, you know, when it says 200 feet, you know, a lot of guys said, well, you got to be below that. And the Army said the highest of the limit is what he was saying. He was like an evaluator guy. And he's like, you know, if it says 200 feet, you're at 200 feet. You know, you're not below 200 feet because the Army says to be at the highest of the limit. Does that sound right? I don't know what that means.
This was like back of the book stuff. I mean,
there's the tolerance, right? And I don't remember what the Army, feet. You know, that doesn't even sound right, but whatever. The you know, you have to be plus or minus so many feet above whatever your target altitude is. But again, that kind of goes to like a different environment. Here, they're saying don't go above 200 feet. So it almost seems like I'd want to fly that at 100 feet to give myself a buffer.
Yeah, but and that's what a lot of other pilots that I've talked to that have flown in that airspace are like, look, we're at 100, we're as low as we can go safely. But I mean, the reality is, in what universe would we ever accept less than, you know, 1,000 feet separation? Like, you know, the fact that 75 or 80 feet was the difference.
That's insane. That's nothing.
Yeah. That's nothing. I mean, okay, if they had been at 200 feet, that's still unacceptable. Like that, in no universe is that okay.
Right. I mean, I would be thinking about like the downdraft from the aircraft flying overhead if I'm that close to them. So I just, that whole thing just seems like it was just a bad idea, and it's honestly surprising that it's taken this long for something bad to happen.
Yeah. So I wanted to go over the CVR because, I've made my feelings known. We always want to, and I still see this. We still, because I read the comments, Gonky doesn't. But on our previous videos talking about this, now that this has come out, people are like, Rebecca Lobach killed 67 or 66, I guess, because she DEI hired killed these people, and that's what people keep harping on and stuff like that. And I wanted to go over the CVR because I read through it today, the full thing, highlighted a few things as we went through. And I think it's telling. And Casmo, I want to rely on your expertise as an Army guy, because to me, nothing stands out as this was the flight that something was going to happen, as they always do. There wasn't anything. But as far as what the CVR is, just for the heads up on it, the pilot was channel 1, and then the co-pilot was channel 2. She was sitting in the left seat. He was sitting in the right seat. She is pilot 2 for all of this, and our INT2 or anything 2. He is 1, and then the crew chief is in the back for 3. So this it actually starts with 1846, so about 2 hours prior to the actual mishap, a little over 2 hours. They were for the first 24 minutes, the instructor pilot was the pilot flying, and pilot being evaluated was navigating by pilotage, utilizing a time distance heading card. So she was on a check ride. The IP did not note any deficiencies or make any corrections to the pilot being evaluated during this period. Throughout the recording, the crew commented on the winds and the resulting effects of turbulence and ground speed of the helicopter. The winds were whipping, and they'll talk about winds the entire time. Radio transmissions received from ground stations and other helicopters were generally broken and of poor quality. Transcript began at 1911 as the helicopter was on approach to Greenhouse Airport in Stevensburg, Virginia. For the most of the transcribed portion of the recording, air traffic control radio transmission were only transcribed if they were addressed to Pat 25, beginning when the crew checked in with Potomac approach at 8:29 p.m. All air traffic control radio transmissions audible in the ICS were transcribed. Transmissions from air traffic control that occurred while the crew was talking to each other on the helicopter were denoted in italics. And then obviously it ended at 2048. And so going through it, a lot of this just reads like a normal crew. And what struck me for the most part is it's very relaxed. You don't get the sense that anybody's edgy or anything like that. She's, the first thing they go through is they're going to this greenhouse thing, and there's this big light that is kind of washing out their NVGs, and they're like, man, that's super bright as they're landing. And they're talking about it's blinding the greenhouse is in sight. And they're like, yeah, the greenhouse, let's see. Like, it's just super casual, not a whole lot going on. They land, and there's a little bit of a learning experience, but nothing really stands out. Then they take off, and they go to, he talks about how he wants to make people fly into the greenhouse more because it's good training, which, standard evaluator, like, oh yeah, that's something we need to do more. The dude sounds awesome. Like, I'd love to, this guy sounds like a great instructor from everything that I'm seeing so far. It just seems like it's, he's just relaxed, and he doesn't have that check ride atmosphere. So he's teaching as they go. It's nothing
it's a good check ride. It's a low threat check ride.
It's very low threat. Now, what strikes me is she's a little bit not proficient. She comes off as somebody who hasn't flown very much and is not super comfortable, especially at night on the NVGs, which is she was off for 5 months for medical. She only has 400 hours in the aircraft. It all kind of makes sense to me. Like, we're talking about, there's a little bit of a change of aircraft control. Who's got the flight controls? You have it. No, I have it. Sorry. That happens. Like, laughing. Yeah. Nobody's really saying, it doesn't seem tense. Like, they're getting along. And then he kind of quizzes her because they're talking about the wind. The wind's coming from the left, and left wind in helicopters, you can get the lost tail rotor effect and this stuff like that. And he kind of asks her, he's like, hey, what would you recommend to counteract the turbulence? And she's like, well, fly a little faster. Standard evaluator asking questions. Fly a little faster than 115. Yeah, okay, well, what else can we do? And then she says, well, he like lower to the ground, fly a little higher to avoid the Bravo. And then he's like, well, is there anything else? Because he's got something in mind. And she's like, well, not over controlling the aircraft. And he's like, yeah, that comes to power settings. And the reason I highlighted this is because I think it becomes a factor when they're over at the low level route by DCA, because you've put this in your mind that, hey, it's turbulent, we're bouncing around. How do we react to this? Okay, power settings. We're just going to hold what we have. And he talks about, just so you know, it's giving us what we want. Fly the power setting and don't worry about VSI. So that kind of tells me, you know, we put that in our head like, hey, don't worry about VSI too much. So if we're a little high, we're going to get ourselves down, but we're not going to dive at it or anything like that. Because remember, their entire job is passengers. They're flying DVs around low altitude and training for that. So I think this kind of puts this bug in their head. And then they get, as they're going, another little learning point. They get the stabilator auto mode fail master caution. And they immediately go, is there anything wrong with it? Okay, I'm going to go to auto control reset. And they go through the checklist, and she is running it for him. And she's like, auto control reset, I'm going to look at the EP, but I already know it. And I thought he made a really good point, because he goes, well, how's that supposed to look? And she goes, what do you mean? The EP? Yeah, any EP. And he teaches her. He goes, hey, run through. She's like, well, you know, maybe more deliberately. He's like, no, we have the FRC code, which I'm guessing is some kind of like quick reaction or some kind of card that they have to look at.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that
Go ahead
for a second, if I could.
Yeah.
So I think probably what's happening there is so I don't remember what it stands for, but you're right. It's like a QRH, you know, QRC card. That was not a thing in the Army for my entire time. The first time I ever saw that kind of stuff was when I went to the airlines. But the Army was very big about, you know, he called chapter 5 and 9, right? Limitations and emergency procedures and underlying steps. And those were things that you had to like know and do. Like day 3 of the Apache course, we had a test on all the underlying steps and all the limits. And it was one of these, like, if you miss any of them, you know, you're getting recycled or, you know, crap like that. And so it became a thing where guys got very hung up on memorizing all these steps. And I will tell you, I did an investigation of a Black Hawk crash in Louisiana years ago. And long story short, it was a result of basically the very junior pilot going through those steps so fast that they didn't stop to realize that they were turning off the wrong engine. Okay. Yeah. So they thought they had a bad engine, and he reached up and pulled the power lever on the wrong engine, because that was the step. But the step that's not in there is like, hey, dude, slow down and make sure that the crew chief is telling you the right thing, or that there's actually an engine failure, or whatever the case may be. And so I think probably that there's a huge culture shift that's going on with pilots. And so this IP is probably flying with a lot of dudes who are immediately going through the immediate action steps, instead of saying, hey, you know what? The airplane's not going to fall out of the sky because the stabilator is going wonky or whatever. We have time. Right. Yep. So there's very few things that you actually have to react to immediately. So that's the I guess the context to that FRC thing.
And I think this reads like an IP evaluator that's got an emphasis item, like you talked about, that's trying to drive that point home. Like, hey, ma'am, great job, but can we learn something? So there's a little bit of debrief going on as we're flying. You know, so it's not like a very strict check ride, just out the gate. And he even talks about that. It's pretty much confirmed that it's, but the FRCs is because we end up killing ourselves because we do something without confirming and verifying. So, I mean, yeah, that's the idea. It's not an immediate step. We're getting in the checklist, working as a crew to ensure we're doing the right thing. So exactly what you said, Casmo. And then she goes, yeah, sometimes I forget. Sorry about that. And they're back outside, you know, doing what they need to do.
And she went through flight school in like 2020.
Yeah.
Or she graduated in 21.
Right.
Those FRCs weren't around yet, because I was still in the Army, and those weren't around yet. So, and that crash I'm talking about happened in 2019, I think. Okay. So she's probably also one of those people that grew up a certain way, and now the culture is having to change to like, let's look at this card before we start pushing buttons.
Yeah, for sure. And so they're talking about the wind. 350. So he's kind of talking about the corrections he's having to make, because and they're doing this nav. She is guiding him as part of the check ride for the navigation, and there's wind that's a factor. And she says something like she's feeling a little dizzy when she looks down with the winds or whatever. I've never, I mean, knock on wood, I've never flown NVGs on a helicopter at night. I mean, I could see though, with, you know, your ground track, especially at slow speed, your ground track doesn't match what your body is telling you you're doing. So you look down and it kind of gives you that sense of vertigo.
Sure.
People mentioned it. I don't see that it's relevant other than it just happened.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I don't either.
Because he comes back, he goes, yep, definitely windy. And that's a crew coordination thing. You know, she sings up and says, hey, I'm kind of feeling this. And he goes, okay, roger that. You know, beautiful night. You know, keep me updated. And so they keep going. And they're talking a lot about turbulence. They're hitting, you know, it's windy out there, winds coming off trees, and they're just talking about keeping it in trim. And he's talking about flying the helicopter. He's like, she didn't like that at all. You know, he is talking about how the helicopter is flying. So you can tell it's a busy night. You know, it's not just a clear, everything's fine. They're working just the weather.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
No, I'm saying I agree with you. And it's busy airspace just in general.
Well, it is. And here we go at 8:00. They're talking to Potomac and they're having radio problems. They've checked in and they get a helicopter traffic call out and Potomac doesn't hear them. They're barely hearing them. And they go, do you see them? Nope. Do you see them? Nope. And they're like looking 9 to 10 o'clock, which 9 to 10 o'clock is exactly where they would have been looking later on at night. So they're already building this visibility is bad scenario on NVGs, and it's a continuous problem. It's not like just one time. And I've never flown the Black Hawk, but I mean, from what I understand, that could be a very common when you're looking in that direction. Hard to spot traffic.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never flown one either, but yeah, possible.
So anyway, they call traffic in sight because they do finally find it out the door. So by the time it's out the right door is when they see it, which is completely opposite of where they were looking. And then they avoid the traffic, and then they hit ident, and there's comm issues. And then she says, hey, would you be okay for me flying for a little while? Because remember, she's pilot monitoring from this point on. And he tells her, hey, you got the controls, just know the wind's kicking out of the left. And they kind of do a little bit of a talk about how, you know, that can affect the helicopter. And he gives her the 200-foot call out. They give her in the Gathersburg P8 for Pat 25. He calls altitude and she says, okay, correcting my altitude. So everybody said that she was ignoring him. Every time he gave a command and an instructional thing, she acknowledged it and said, yep, I'll do better. I'm sorry. So that whole idea that she was just doing whatever she wanted and ignoring him or the rank was an issue, I don't see any of that in this transcript at all.
I don't either, and it makes me angry, and I'm even seeing some comments that I'm trying to ignore. Like, this was totally routine. Like, as I read through this sounds like any number of flights that I've been on. It's a relaxed cockpit. It's a cooperative cockpit. It's someone who, when I read what she said, again, we're reading words. We don't have any tone. We don't have any context or anything, but I'm not reading anything that sounds like she's being snippy. Like, it's like somebody posted something like she says, okay, fine. Well, that could be in a lot of different ways, but there's nothing in here that reads to me like she's got a chip on her shoulder. And I'm willing to bet from everything that I've heard and everything that I've read that the rank is not an issue. Like, it is so rare for that to happen in the Army because it's just the way that it is. And I have my own soapbox about why it is the way it is and why it shouldn't be that way. But this is the way it is. And I don't think I've ever come across a lieutenant who's flying with an instructor pilot on a check ride who's trying to pull rank. It does not happen because people who say shit like that have never been in the military and they don't know what they're talking about, right? They watch Hunt for Red October or something, and they think that they have an understanding of how rank works with it. It's not how it is. Trust me, that's CW3, or I think he was a 3. He was in charge. There was no ambiguity about that in the cockpit. And anytime, as you've said, Mover, that he said, hey, this is out of tolerance or whatever, it seemed to me she was working towards that. And I was kind of crunching some numbers because, you know, we're kind of getting, I don't want to get ahead of you, but, you know, we were talking before too about proficiency. And I do want to address one thing. people, and I've heard this from the get-go, is like, oh, this training flight shouldn't have happened. You have to understand what this organization does. They are there because of DC. Like, it exists because of DC, right? They're there to evacuate people, you know, like staff and congressmen, all that kind of stuff. If something happens, they're VIP transport. So this idea that they shouldn't have been flying in that airspace, that is where they work. Trust me, you do not want them to get the call at 2 a.m. to go land on the White House lawn or the lawn of Congress to pick somebody up. And it's the first time they've ever done it. All right. So they have to fly this airspace. They have to. That's how they learn the area. So these training flights happen all the time, and they should happen all the time, albeit that route that they went on, I don't think is a good one. So that's why that stuff happened. But she was a very junior pilot too. And so I think, to me, again, as I read the transcripts, that comes out to me that she knows that she's behind the power curve because she didn't have a lot of hours. I did the math. You know, you were saying 400 something hours. That's including simulator. So I came up with like 333 hours total, and about 100 of those, 120 of those, if I'm reading her 759s right, was in flight school. So from 2021, when she graduated flight school, to the time that this happened, that's 206 hours in like 3.5 years. That's not a lot of flight time. And I know that she did some aid work or something like that. That's a huge gap. So she was probably not very confident, but in my opinion, just reading this stuff, she was trying to do the right things. That's my take.
Well, she was out for medical for 5 months too. So that,
and she had a medical, right? I think she had I'm reading again her stuff.
The aid thing, they actually addressed that. The aid thing never took away from her duties. She never like missed any time or anything.
Oh, okay. I didn't know how that worked there, because I was looking her what we call ORB, her records brief, and it didn't delineate when she was doing that stuff. It just shows that she was assigned to Belvoir. And I know sometimes, but that's interesting. Yeah. So she was still on ATP. She's still flying. But the one thing that does pop out, again, I'm not trying to get ahead of you, but the thing that pops out is missed ATP minimums. And what that means is you have the minimums that, and I don't know what it is in Black Hawk land. I'm trying to remember what it was for us, but let's say it's like 70 hours semi-annual. If you don't meet those, that's when it becomes a problem, and they can try to fluff you some more time to get you going. But it's not uncommon for staff officers, particularly if she's doing the kind of stuff that she was probably doing as an aide, that it's hard to go out and fly. It's hard. So I think that contributed as well.
Well, she's also in charge of the FARPs. She was in fuels, and I'll get to that in a minute, because they actually talk about that in flight. So going back to just the scenario, 80 indicated, 108 on the ground. So they've got a lot of wind. And they're, at this low altitude, and they decide shouldn't need to go to the FARP unless you want to, because they have one more place they have to go. They've already looked at it, and it's part of their training route. And they're like, and the instructor just seems so chill. He's like, man, I feel bad having those dudes go all the way out there and we don't go. They start talking about that. And then the crew chief pipes up. He's like, well, it's kind of their only job, typical. Like, I can just hear the guys like, well, that's kind of the one thing they do. And he's like, well, I feel bad. And then he laughs and he goes, better watch it. You got the OIC of the FARP on board. And this is what impressed me with her, because she laughs and goes, if you got some issues with it, and not in a demeaning way or anything like that, as a commander, she's like, hey, if there's something going on, let me know, and I'm going to try to fix it, which goes back to what Austin talked about. Everything we've heard about this is she was an excellent leader that was trying to do the right thing by her people. And then the crew chief kind of says, well, there's some friction, some stuff has happened. They made a trainee stand far away. And then she goes, well, was there anything else? Because she wants to know. She genuinely is trying. And they're like, well, that's off the top of my head. I can't really remember it. And then she talks about, well, they're manned. They only have like 7 people there. They need 4, and then they go back to flying and stuff. And he's talking about pilot control lighting's the coolest thing you can do. Like, this is a relaxed cockpit. There's no friction between the two. I think they're both well respected, but the wind is a problem. And so they go to this next place, the FARP, where they're talking about going there, and they're talking about wind direction, because they brought this up too, about how she had to do a go around. And first of all, go arounds are free, but second, it's because of this wind. Because what they do is they approach probably opposite direction, and they get this quartering tailwind that is causing both lost tail rotor effectiveness in some degree, and this huge ground speed. like 100 knots. She's pulling the power back. She's getting her indicated airspeed pretty slow, which is a student error. And that's where I say she's like average to slightly below average, because her head work just isn't there, because she's not proficient. She's not doing this a lot. And it doesn't become a big deal because he's just instructing. He's like, hey, this is one of those, talk about LTE, get slow, pulling in that power. We've got wind from the left door. Remember all the stuff, and then they come in, the lights are bright, make left traffic he talks about, and then he's coaching her through, hey, keep that airspeed up. What's my ground speed? I'm kind of moving, but my indicated slow. I'm moving fast because there's a 30-knot split between their ground speed and their indicated airspeed because of the wind, which if they'd have come in the right direction, this wouldn't have been a factor. And he's just, hey, a little bit right pedal. And then they go left quartering wind. I feel it. And then they get in close and it's a go around. Okay. Check ride, probably not the best place to have that, but it becomes a learning experience. The thing where she screws up is she tries to turn right and he goes, well, hey, ma'am, why wouldn't you want to go into the wind? And she doesn't argue. She doesn't argue at all. He tells, get the airspeed up, and she goes, okay, yeah. And he explains. He does an instructional thing, which every instructor is going to do, turn into the wind, use it more for lift. I don't think a qualified pilot should be having to hear this on a check ride, but I don't see a problem with him doing it because he seems like that good evaluator instructor that is always teaching.
Every good check ride, I was just saying this the other day at Recurrent, like a check ride to me should also be a training event. Like every now and then you run into that dude who just wants to sit there and just, pencil, you did this wrong, but that's silly. Yeah, I agree with you. And most check rides I've ever been on, it's the same way. Like if you do something, because again, he's conscious of the fact, and I feel like we're like making excuses. No, we're just like being honest about like our perception of what we think and from our own experience. But my perception is that he went into this knowing that she's low time. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even do the math on how many goggle hours you have, but if you've never flown goggles, you should take a big tall glasses, shut the F up, because you have no idea what you're talking about, because it's hard. And it's hard to do in an urban environment. There's a lot of lighting, ground lighting out in that area.
Talk about that a lot too.
It's incredibly difficult and it's very unnerving. To fly in the dark with goggles, it took me a good couple 100 hours before I felt comfortable. And then once you do it, once it clicks, it's like, oh, it's awesome. But that first like 100, 200 hours flying at night under goggles. And again, if you're not doing it consistently, it's incredibly off-putting. It's scary. And you're in a very busy airspace. There's towers, there's all kinds of stuff going on. So there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of pressure that's going on right now. And it sounds to me like he's taking that into account and saying, I'm not gonna just be an asshole. I'm gonna be, and he's probably like this for every other check ride too. I mean, he just sounds like he was probably a dude that was like coaching people along. And that's not pencil whipping dudes through. That's being an instructor pilot.
Yeah, you can't wash everybody out, but
you can't. I would also have anybody.
To your point, Casmo, remember this is a Lima, steam gauges, which adds to the complexity. We're not talking glass cockpit, glass panels. We're talking steam gauges that are hard to see at night, because you're looking under the goggles. You're
looking under the goggles.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
So they're talking, lights bright. And then she says, she's not sure. This rattled her confidence a little bit. She's like, I'm not real sure. And he's like, totally awesome instructor. He's like, what's up? She's like, this doesn't feel right. And he's like, you're good. You're just getting your ass kicked by the wind. And she comes in and she now tries it and says, I'm just not comfortable. And she does her own go around. She's like, you know what? I like it's rattled her a little bit. And so he goes, hey, ma'am, you mind if I give it a shot? And she says, which shows you that she's trying to learn. Yes, please. Because she wants to see this. She wants to, the IP demo. I've been there, dude. I've been there where I, got rattled by something and the instructor says, hey, you want me to try that? And like, yeah, please. I want to watch, because you learn by that. And so he does 100%. It. And just, he's a great pilot. He's a awesome pilot that makes it work, and the crew coordination works out, and he sets it right down, and it works out. And he said, and then after, he's trying to alleviate her stress. He's like, yeah, the wind makes it tricky, but it's the windsock has been blowing 300, but you can come in any way you want as long as you come in and make aware of those lights. Like, he's still explaining how he did it and instructing. He just seems like the kind of dude you'd want to fly with. And she's just kind of like, well, maybe I need to be higher in my chair, because she's trying to figure out why it's not working for her.
She's also remembering that she's on a check ride, right? Yeah. Like you just did a go around on a check ride. Yeah. And while that's free and all that stuff, it's still, I mean, I had to do 2 go rounds on my 737 type ride. And let me tell you something. For a dude who's been shot, like, I was sweating bullets. So I can imagine for her, she's sitting there in the dark and she's doing go rounds and she's just sitting there. I just failed this truck ride. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Well, and he offers, hey, you want to do that? And she's like, because she didn't want to put that risk on herself on the truck ride. So she's like, no, okay, well, let's go, on to the next thing. And here, they see the deer, and she asks if he's a hunter, which that sounds like the standard check ride. Like, so you like things, yes.
When you're get them talking about something else.
Let's not think 100%. About. Yeah. And he's trying to make it easy. He's like, oh, I saw a shadow, almost pooped myself. Like, he's trying to calm her down. Like, he knows that it's a little bit rattling because it's a check ride. And then she, checks in, she calls herself out, or he calls himself out. Sorry. He checks in and says that was a terrible call. I mean, the guy is just self-deprecating, really relaxed. And now we're getting into the Potomac approach. So they talk to the National Tower, and they request the Cabin John route, Route 1, Route 4, Davison. And if you look, all the transmissions are broken. They are having radio issues. In fact, she comes out and said, is he muffled? And she's like, yeah, I didn't catch what he said. I'm glad you did. Like, all this comm, they're having radio issues, and that's not helping the situation. Volume's 18. It's loud enough. Ma'am, you can fly. Sounds like you've communicated all that needs to be communicated. So they have a change of aircraft control, because she wants the flight control. She wants to fly because, she wants that time, like you talked about, Casmo. So they give her the ident, and they do that. And now you can hear broken transmission. Route 1 to Route 4 is what they request. They get it approved. And the comm sounds really crappy. Do they have a UHF? Winds are 3-2. Like, they can't get a full radio call out. And then they say, well, do they have a UHF? Because sometimes UHF works better for military aircraft because they're on VHF. And they said, well, he sounds really crappy, but we don't know if they use UHF. So we're going to stay on VHF. And they're talking about Blackjack. I don't know what Split the Peas are, but they're talking about some other aircraft that does something that they usually don't want them to do, which tells you they're familiar. She's familiar. She goes, I thought they didn't want us doing that, which means this is not her first time in this airspace. She's at least familiar with what's supposed to be happening. And this is also the first time they start talking about other aircraft, and they even make fun of this other Blackjack out there. But then he puts the radio in COM 2 and see if he could pick up better, because sometimes they're different antennas, right? COM 1 will be up top, COM 2 will be down, and maybe sometimes you can get a better reception.
Well, I don't know how many radios the Blackhawk has, but I imagine they were switching maybe from UHF to VHF, because I don't think they have more than one of those, but I could be wrong.
I don't know. Left seat's inside, which is saying that he's looking inside at something. So he's down looking at something else, and she's like, say again. Oh, good, I got your scan. So she's looking outside. They still don't hear what tower's saying, calling out altitudes, and then she makes another mistake. So he looks up and he goes, hey, what's up, man? Where are we going? And she goes down the river, Route 1 to Route 4. And she's like, he comes back and says, you just took a right turn that's taking us to Great Falls. And then she doesn't argue. There's not this thing. She goes, oh, yeah, sorry, should be headed. All right, coming left. And then he makes a joke because that's his personality. I'm all game for it, but we just got to let the dude know.
And it also indicates that it wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah. And she goes, totally fair. And he says, I'm all game for going to shake up some Great Falls at 20 feet tonight. We didn't brief it, so we'll have to make a blood pack. Just make it a joke. It's a joke. And she's like, nope, right. There's no animosity. There's no rank. None of this is happening, even at this part of this flight. they're still talking about whether it's smooth, which they're getting bounced around, low altitude. And I'll get to this when we get to Blue Streak, but it's still windy. There's still a lot of turbulence, which it goes back to my previous point about how you mitigate that, which was VSI. Remember he talked about that. They get to the chain bridge, 700, and then so we'll just maintain here. We're already at 7. Okay, like he's kind of talking her through it, and they're worried about this blackjack traffic, and then he said, what did we request? 1 to 4. So we'll head straight down the river. So straight down the river. There's no lateral confines, just be down the river. And that's what they had agreed upon. And they're still worried about blackjack at the Memorial Bridge because that's their threat is other helicopters.
And blackjack is a Coast Guard.
Okay. They're looking for that. And here's the first indication. I don't see him yet. Oh, he's down in the lights. Remember cultural lighting like Casmo just talked about on NVGs?
And you're very low altitude. So all of that light is stacking on top of each other, right? So it's kind of like the beaten zone of shooting something if you're strafing or whatever, right? If you're looking down from the top, you've got this map view of all this lighting, and then you can see movement a little bit better, right? Now lower your view to everything. At 200 feet is not very high. You're seeing all that light for the next however many miles. It's all stacked on top of each other. So it's going to make things very hard to see other aircraft. It's very difficult to see other aircraft in that environment.
So he talks him through chain bridge at 700. Next will be the key bridge down to 300. And that's for the first time we hear Blue Streak 5307, which I don't know necessarily that they'd be listening for, but this is where they say winds, which is 320, 17 gust 25, which means they're going to be crabbing as they're going across. But it's gusty winds. So turbulent, a lot of winds. Blue Streak now gets circled to 3-3, and they take that. And then she talks about getting choppy close to the ground. Oh, yeah, down low, it's going to get choppy. We're at 300. She says we're at 300, and he says, well, I got you at 4 looking for 3. And then she descends further, and he goes, okay, there's 300 for 200. So there's a little bit of discrepancy, but they don't address it. She's just complying. It's not ignoring. She's just 100% complying. And that's where the change to runway 33 again is reiterated. She calls out 200. There's no response. He's still talking her through the right pedal because of the winds, because of their crabbing and the winds coming off the right side there. And then they call clear left. There's a crane, no factor, which is what they're supposed to do, call out obstacles. And you're at 300 feet, come down for me. So he, on his gauges, is saying, you know, you're a little high. And she doesn't argue. All she says is, yeah, go down to 200, crane out the right, no factor. Okay. I don't see any problems with that at this point. Now, 1 minute later is the first call out. Pat 25 traffic just south of the Wilson Bridge is an RJ at 1,200 feet for runway 33. And then they come back. Pat 25 has traffic in sight, request visual separation approved. And that is the instructor. The instructor says he has the traffic in sight. They don't even talk about it. There's no, all he says is he's got them stacked up. So the instructor says, I see him. Immediate response. She doesn't even acknowledge the traffic because she's busy flying. So I'm assuming there's this assumption in the cockpit that if he called the traffic in sight, that he's got them. And then he makes a comment, he's got them stacked up because what he's looking through is this line of aircraft.
Yeah.
Yeah. That are just
and let me address that too, because I'm sure that the conspiracy theorists out there right now are just loving it because like, well, why did he call it in sight if he didn't have it in sight? You don't know they didn't have it in sight. Why didn't she call it? Because she's flying the goddamn airplane. Okay, so I just the other day I had to do an almost go around because the controller said there was another aircraft. My co-pilot saw the aircraft. I didn't look because I'm trying to fly the airplane and get ready to land, and I was much higher than these people were. So. Yeah, that's why you have 2 people in the cockpit, right? So if he saw the traffic, and as you just said, he's got them stacked up. We've all seen exactly what he's looking at, right? Airplane, rolling into the airport. They're all lined up. Which airplane did he see? Did he see the right one or not? And I don't know, but what we just talked about, there's an altimeter discrepancy right there. And jets move kind of fast.
Also, too, at this point, the line is all from the same place. They haven't split off. Like it would be a kind of a diverging line towards 3-3, but it hasn't started yet. So he just picks out the dot and says, we must be okay in his mind, more than likely. And he goes back to the winds. We've pretty much got a right quartering tailwind is going to be pushing you. So he's talking through the crabbing and stuff like that. Better not fight the wind, right pedal. She's probably out of trim. And then tower comes back. You got the RJ in sight. Now you hear the beeping with the audible alert, and there's an interruption because Pat 25 is coming back. Yeah, I got the traffic in sight, and she says, "I don't know, whoa below," which I think this is a reference to how bumpy it is. Like she is now, bounced around and not on altitude, and she's kind of getting bounced around turbulence wise. And then he says, all right, ma'am, come left for me. I think that's why he's asking. And she says, sure. She doesn't argue. She just says, sure. And he says, we're kind of in the middle of the route. So he's basically telling her, hey, we need to hug. They're not off route. They're just, maybe we hug the shoreline a little bit more. That's what they're asking. I don't think either of them ever put it together that this was a circling. And then, basically the impact happens. So between the time, I want to point this out, 52.5 is when he says come left. And the impact is 57.6, 57.7. So 5 seconds between that. There's no time. There's like, even if she had maneuvered at 80 knots, there's no time for the aircraft to, like, it's too late at this point.
Yeah, the closure rates at that point, 200 knots. Yeah.
All right. So there's that one. I wanted to go through the airplane one, not the whole thing, but there's a couple things I wanted to go over.
Gonky, you're good, buddy?
Gonky still alive?
Just checking you.
Oh, dude, the Mover and Casmo show is way better than the Mover and Gonky show. I'm digging. You guys keep going. This is very
Somebody in the comments said this is what Mover must feel like when you start talking about the boat.
Yeah.
With Wombat.
So a couple things I highlighted here. They get the initial check-in, expect light chop. So everybody's talking about the turbulence and the wind and all this. So it's not just them complaining. This is a known thing. So they come in for the landing, and then they ask if they could take runway 33. The captain says, we got the numbers for it. Co-pilot says, we sure do. Let me check. Yep, same numbers. And then, yep, we can do that. Change to circle to land. And they just go through their normal checks. Flaps 30, gear down, all the sounds look right. They're not hearing anything about traffic. So they're just doing kind of their before landing checklist is complete. Thank you. No problem. Pat 25, they hear him say Pat 25 Roger, but they don't really, there's no correlation to it. And then configured, you want me to clear the flight director? Because he's doing it visually. He's not using the box or anything like that. And then he clears it off. And he hears Pat 25 traffic. This is the only indication. And it doesn't say who it is. So if I'm the Blue Streak guys, I'm not even thinking about it. RJ at 1,200 circle to runway 33. I mean, maybe you would think about that. He says he's got to level off. So I'm not sure if they had like a step down before they could make the turn. But I don't think it's really completely relevant. They hit 1,000. And you hear runway 1 line up and wait. Traffic is circling 33. So that's the other indication, which that was not on the other one. And then stables, spoilers stowed, confirm missed approach altitude set. All sounds normal. 200 feet set. This all sounds like normal airline stuff. 500, they get their stable target sync call. And 2 white, 1 red. Everything's looking good for these dudes. Then they hear Pat 25, you got the RJ in sight. And if they had been, if it hadn't been the busiest airspace in the country and just one departure in this is probably where they could have saved the day, because Pat 25, you got the RJ in sight and you hear the audible alarm in the background and they get a traffic. I mean, this is at 20:47:40 and the impact is 47:59. So 19 seconds they could have done a go around and missed this. But that assumes it's not DCA. There's not 100 people talking at the same time, and everybody is on their game. And it's standard to go around for a traffic call, which it is not. So did the possibility exist to prevent this? But no, yes. Was it likely? No. Swiss cheese lines up, right? So they had indications. The TCAS did what it was supposed to do. It's not going to give you an RA at low altitude, but they did get a traffic call, and they did hear pass behind the RJ, and they, unfortunately, they get they saw it. The other guys, the helicopter probably had no idea, but these guys, unfortunately, saw it. So that's what I wanted to go over, because I think that's pertinent and important. Gonky, what do you think, man?
You guys covered a lot of stuff. I mean, I did quite a few of flights like this in the Navy, in the Hornet, where you had, we just called them cat others, right? They come in, get a refresher, and like Casmo, it's kind of like you're saying, it was a check ride by name, but it was really, let's just knock the rust off tonight. You got any questions? Just ask me. Like, I've already written the grade sheet. We're good. Unless we end up in a parachute, I might change it. But
yeah, it's yours to fail, right?
Yeah, it's you said, a good check ride. I mean, okay, she may have been a little bit inexperienced, maybe, but I mean, she had wings. She's an experienced aviator. Hey, let's just go out there and knock out some training, because, like you said, Casmo, a good check ride. There's also some training in there. And man, as you're reading through that mover, nothing. Like, I literally, as you're telling, I remembered like flights I did with guys. That kind of reminds me of that. So, like you said, very relaxed. And then when you went through the, the guys in the airline or the CRJ, I mean, that's all standard stuff. So, you've said it before, mover, pick your villain, right? So everybody wants a villain. And look, listen, I'm anti-DEI, but listen, this, in my mind, this crash happened because they allowed simultaneous ops of helicopters flying down the river, circle land 3-3. You guys touched on it, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were at 275 feet, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that should have given them a 5-foot buffer. So what happened? And in what freaking world is 5 feet acceptable?
Right, yeah, it's insane.
So everything worked as it should. By what the CVR and the helicopter says, good crew coordination, competent instructor, cooperative student. CRJ, those guys, man, that sounds just like, me coming into land at night. And like you said, mover, TCAS is working as advertised. It's doing its thing. Yes, ATC is doing what they're doing as well. And dude, I mean, yeah, he, like you said, could have saved the day, could have, would have, should have. Hindsight's 2020. I don't put the blame on the ATC guys. To me, it's pretty clear at this point, having looked at all the facts, why on earth procedurally is that allowed? So, and Casmo, maybe you can shed some light
anymore. That has been shut down.
Well,
that is no longer a thing.
Well, yeah, it should have never been a thing, right?
Yeah.
But again,
how many close calls did you say there was? Like 80 something?
So Casmo, as I was listening, that's what came to my mind. And I don't know if you guys have this in Army squadrons, but so in the Navy, they're obviously they can't write rules and regs for everything because aviation is dynamic, and we learn as we do. It's like, dude, that was a little sketchy. So we used to have these things called read initials.
FCIS.
The reading file.
Reading file. It's like, oh, a new guy almost killed himself doing something kind of legal. Be aware of this, and we would have to read it and initial it. Does anything like that exist in Army helicopter?
That probably was the whole, hey, let's use the QRC, the card. That was probably a product of that, right, Casmo?
Well, the only thing I can think of that sort of relates to what you're saying is we call the reading file, and that's just like really like procedural changes or something, and then like they'll change your card to red, right? So when you go in to go fly, you look over and say, oh, my name is red. Mm-hmm. What am I missing? Oh, document 2, 3, and 4. Let me read those real quick.
Yeah. And the only reason why I bring it up is if there were like 80 of these near misses, I would think there, and there would be a read initial, but I don't know. And would that have?
Well, no, it's to me that like that's beyond that. That's it makes me mad. A good friend of mine died in Fort Lewis some time ago, years ago, and they had a midair collision. Two Kiowas ran into each other, and upon investigation, they found that that the range that they were operating in, this was a known area where there was comm blackouts. And like, it was one of these things where like this had almost happened many, many times already and people knew about it. And it was just like, well, we'll just wait till somebody dies. And so 4 people died before we finally fixed it. And that's what this is. Like 80, like get out of here. Like, right. What are we waiting on the 90th before we do something about it? Like 4 or 5, it's like, oh, this was a problem, right? Like 10 is like, okay, boys and girls, we need to stop doing this thing and figure out what's wrong. At 80, people should have been fired. And it has nothing to do with the pilots. It has nothing to do with the tower controllers. It's whoever is in charge that allows this shit to go on. And I don't know how long that route existed. I lived in DC back in 2015. Them helicopters were flying up and down the river back then. That's what should have been fit. And it's not partisan. It's not political. It's just like, who proved this and who knew that this happened 80 something times?
Well, yeah. So the NTSB chairman, that's actually one of the parts I watched live, was livid. Because she's like, FAA had this thing, airlines had this data tracking, the NTSB had this data tracking. Nobody was talking to each other. The Army didn't know that there were 80 near misses, right?
See, that's wild. Yeah.
So
right,
remember one of the things she brought up is, remember the T-38 versus the Airbus right after this happened, and we were like, oh, T-38 flyover, and we kind of talked about that. She called American Airlines because that's who was involved. And they said, what are you talking about? We have no idea. Like because there's no data sharing, or there was none. Yeah. And that was her question. She goes, how do we break down the bureaucracy, take down these walls, and ensure that people are getting the data till we know that there's a hotspot, that we know that this is an issue? Because realistically, if they had been on runway 1, we're not having a show right now. We're not talking about 67 people dead.
Yeah. It's like and we track all this data. Yeah. We track all this data, right? Yeah. Like, heaven forbid I'm greater than, 500 feet per minute rate of descent on landing, because the box in the back will tell the company that I landed at 600 feet per minute, or that I was there for a minute, below 500 feet or something. And like, we have all this data, and no one's doing anything with it in a meaningful way, right? We're going to bust your balls because you landed too hard or something like that, even though it was perfectly fine. But we're not going to fix these procedural problems that will result in somebody crashing or running into somebody or something. It's stupid. Pisses me off.
Yeah, like I said, man, Casmo, I'm not saying like, our read initial would have fixed it, but I'm just curious.
I understand.
But dude, you can't, just being completely unbiased, like you said, you're not going to sit there and tell me that it was acceptable to have circling approach to 3-3 while having helicopters at night go up and down the river with just we got them in sight, because
100 feet. 100 feet.
100 feet. If everything had gone the way it's supposed to, 100 feet. Can you imagine?
No, dude. That's unacceptable.
And what Austin had talked about was that they were having people hold at the bridge. If there was somebody circling on 3-3, they would have other helicopters hold at the bridge.
That was a technique, though, right? That wasn't.
Yes, it was a technique. It was the normal technique, but it was something that they were used to. But in general, this mishap is the result of poor execution of a plan that never should have been in place in the first place.
We're very lucky. It was the time bomb, dude. It's going to happen, right?
You can throw the 2 Army pilots under the bus all you want. They were on a training flight. I get it. People don't want military training around civilians. Yeah, she was showing that, she was average to slightly below average on this flight because whatever proficiency or whatever, but she didn't intentionally do it. She wasn't like put there by any other means than she was a pilot in the squadron doing a check ride, and she happened to be the one on the controls at the time.
But it's a moot point because he's the aircraft commander, dude. Like that's the other thing that
he's the one that called visual. He called visual and requested visual separation, and there was no discussion of you got him. He was the one that called visual. So if you want to blame somebody, which I don't, because I don't think you could put that on that one person. Now, the other piece people said was at ADSB. They turned their ADSB off. You don't want, when you are a national security mission, you do not want to show the patterns and what those helicopters, those routes fly. That's why they don't turn their ADSB. It's a national security issue.
So I don't think they even have them.
They did. No, they did.
They did. Oh, because because of that mission set. Because I don't think normal Blackhawks have them.
They have it, but it was off, and they were, people were like, well, if they had ADSB. Here's the other thing about ADSB.
It's not going to do anything.
It's not going to do anything because the Blue Streak RJ, number one, got a TCAS alert, so the system worked, and number two, TCAS does not rely on ADSB. TCAS relies on Mo3 Charlie. So nothing would have changed if everybody had been on ADSB. Not a single thing would have been different.
Choose your villain. But at the end of the day, it's the crap procedure that was allowed, dude. I mean,
we don't accept that anywhere else. There's no place on Earth in the landing environment where you're like, well, it's okay to pass within 100 feet of another aircraft.
I can't even imagine it, dude. I can't even imagine it. The margin of error there is so narrow.
Like, you're in the least maneuverable state in an airline.
Right, yeah.
You're screwed, dude. 100%.
Well, Casmo, you can answer this because another dumb question I get is, well, why couldn't the helicopter just hover?
Oh, I hate people.
OGE hover at night after you've been flying 80 knots on goggles?
They're at 80 knots. You don't just hover. Don't get me started. It's like one of those things like, I don't know, why don't you poop out of your mouth? Like it's just you just don't hover suddenly from 80 knots. And I will tell you that there is something you can attest to this too, because you fly helicopters, flying straight and level at speeds, or just flying forward and then transitioning to hover behind, like like I used to have to do it to trees and a patch. Like it takes a second, like your brain like, whoa, okay, I'm doing something different. So the idea that you're just gonna pull up into a 200-foot hover and dodge the jet, like, get out of town. No, I don't think people understand. Like, and you highlighted it in a couple seconds. Like, there's so much, I don't want to call it chaos, but there's just a lot of external things happening to you in the airline. Like, they had a lot of stuff going on that's normal, but it's a lot. And then the helicopters got a lot. There's a lot of traffic. There's the radios going. And it is super annoying when the radio's not working great and you can't make out what someone's saying and stuff. So it's just, there's a lot going on. But again, that 100-foot separation is ridiculous. It should be illegal and somebody should have went to jail.
Glad you asked, Phil O. ILS PRM. Go look it up. There's a whole procedure for simultaneous landings on parallel runways
and special training.
And special training.
Yeah, you can't. Not anybody can do it.
It's not just anything. Right. There's breakout
special thing on your ticket.
It's a whole thing on the check ride we have to do separate, and it's not just best case 100-foot separation. There's a whole litany of stuff. So look that up.